Let's talk about the domestic impact of those left at home when the Mormon missionaries went abroad in the 19th century. Mormonism is well known for their deep commitment to missionary work. Just last month, the LDS Church announced a record number of missionaries. It's a rite of passage for younger members, especially young men and women between the ages of 18 and 20 now. And it's also a way for older members to sacrifice again once they are retired later on in life. But that model of going out either as single young adults or as elderly couples hasn't always been the case. For the faith's first century, most missionaries were older men and some women who were often married and leaving their wives behind. In fact, between 1830 and 1900, 68% of missionaries were married men who, again, had to leave their families behind. So while the histories of Mormon missionary work often focus on the sacrifice and the heroism of the often men who went abroad, we're missing half of the story. What about the women who are left behind? How did they deal with the loneliness, the economics, and the other trials that came with raising a family without their husband? And because this took place in the 19th century, how did polygamy fit into all of this, both in terms of those who had plural families already at home, as well as the constant anxiety that their husbands might bring home another plural wife from abroad? Thankfully, we have a new collection of letters that give insights onto all of these questions. Edited by Jennifer Lund and Elizabeth Oberdick Anderson, entitled "We All Must Be Crazy: The Correspondence of Sarah Peterson Lund to Her Missionary Husband, 1874 to 1894. It's officially out with the University of Utah Press next month, but I am told that copies should be shipped any day now. And I know I only cover books that I like on this channel. I try to be positive. And documentary histories can sometimes be a bit of a slog and mostly directed at academics. But this one I found immensely enjoyable, which is why I'm highlighting it on this channel for other people to check out. So in this video, I'll briefly introduce the volume and the Sanie Lund, the character who's at the center of it. I'll then interview the two authors, and then I'll summarize why I think this is such a valuable contribution and worth your consideration. So let's dig in. This volume is centered around the life of Sarah Ann Peterson Lund, who is known as Sanie. So we're going to go by Sanie throughout this video. And her life was centered around missions. Her father was one of the many that was called on missions at a very famous 1852 General Conference, where Brigham Young did two things. One, he publicly announced polygamy to the world, the worst kept secret up until that point. And two, he called on all these men to go on global missions. And this did two things. First, it really extended the church's reach and was the foundations of Mormonism becoming a global faith. And two, it embedded polygamy within the Mormon message, because most of those missionaries, including Sanie's father, would come home and become polygamists, forming the foundational generation of Mormon polygamists in Utah. Sanie was born shortly after he left on his mission, and then her life would be based around the church, and then she would marry, and then her husband would serve many missions, leaving her at home. This is where the quote comes from. When an aunt who is not in Utah and is not a Mormon finds out that her husband's going on another mission, this time to Scandinavia, she allegedly responded that "we all must be crazy," which kind of captures that dynamic quite well. Now, Sanie did not have much by way of formal education, but her letters reveal a keen wit and an incisive perspective. She eventually marries Anton Lund in 1870. Anton was born in Denmark, migrated with his mother in 1862, and though he did not have much of an impressive background, he was quickly climbing the ecclesiastical ladder. In fact, he'll eventually be called as an apostle and eventually a counselor in the first presidency. But during the letters of the volume, he's frequently called on missions. And this at a time when he and Sanie are raising 9 children, which it's probably an exaggeration to say that he's raising them. He's often out on missions. He serves 4 missions that took him away from home a total of 7 years. And Sanie, who often was quite clear about the discomfort that came with this, once said, quote, I feel it is not the easiest thing in the world to be a missionary wife, which is quite the understatement. Her letters express deep concerns about their practical life, discomfort with the specter of polygamy, more on that in a bit, gossip from around the town, as well as incisive analysis of Mormonism at the time, including frequent pointing out of inequalities when it comes to gender. In other words, these letters are an incisive look at what Mormon women were thinking at the time. Now, the volume contains 105 letters or fragments of letters, and this is how the two editors summarize it. Quote, "This volume presents a rich and extensive correspondence of Sanie Lund and examines what it meant to be the wife of a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the 19th century in all its complexity. While Sanie's story cannot be extrapolated to represent all Latter-day Saint women who sent husbands into the mission field, many elements of her story are typical, illuminating the challenging circumstances all missionary wives faced." Now, besides containing these 105 letters, this volume also includes 3 interpretive chapters, which introduce the readers to key themes. First, one on being a missionary wife, which talked about the practical concerns and struggles, worries about money and finances, as well as concerns over gender equality, but also her resiliency and empowerment of trying to press forward. This is a rewarding story to where you come to root for Sanie. One of the reasons modern readers will root for Sanie is found in the second interpretive chapter, The Specter of Polygamy, because Sanie was deeply concerned that she might one day become a plural wife, which she did not want. Her letters often tease, sometimes humorous, sometimes biting, her husband, making it clear that she would not like him to come home with a plural wife. This is just one example of many. Quote, "This having a man thousands of miles away, converting fine-looking girls and living on their smiles and flatteries and wondering which one he had better emigrate, is not what it's cracked up to be. But you did say in one of your letters that you was not going to do that way. Well, you may or may not, and I don't know as I care. And then again, I do care." This is what I mean when it says they're funny, they're witty, and they're very incisive of the dread. And then the final interpretive chapter is Home in Ephraim, where it really gives a daily life in Sanpete County, a great insight into how the ward operated, how the business operated, and how her home operated. I will note that her fear of her husband Anton becoming a polygamist never came true. He never took a plural wife. In fact, he was the first apostle since the first generation of apostles to not take a plural wife, which it'd be hard not to think that Sanie had some influence on that. But that's enough of an overview. Let's get into the interview. But before I get to the interview, just a reminder that if you enjoy this kind of content, explaining the past and why it's relevant to the present, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I do deep dives on topics every Monday, I connect the past to the present every Wednesday, and then I talk about the historian's craft every Friday, pulling back the curtain, either talking with authors like today, covering classics in the field, or looking at the sources behind historiographical articles so that you can be exposed to the sources and develop your own historical mindset. And if you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have chosen to give back, including many just in the last few weeks, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee, you get early access to the videos, you get little icons next to your name when you leave comments, but most importantly, you can feel good about supporting public-facing, rigorous scholarship. A new perk that comes with membership now is I will be doing maybe monthly or so, I haven't decided the frequency, Mailbag Mondays, where I will be spending some time to dig into your questions. The first of those will be coming up this next Monday. So if you are a member, you can go to my YouTube channel, go to my posts, find where I talk about the Mailbag Monday, and find the link there in the comments and leave your questions. If you're not a member, you can become a member and do that as well. I also encourage you to subscribe to my free Kit newsletter, where I sound out links, announcements, updates, help you follow all the things I'm doing across my platforms, including on social media channels. So you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok, where I do supplemental materials. Please mark your calendar for Wednesday, August 5th, which is this next Wednesday. at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. I will be doing a live discussion here on this YouTube channel. I'll be talking about the theme of Mormonism continuing to wrestle with racial issues, but I'll be willing to answer other questions that come your way. So anyways, that should be lots of fun. I always love these monthly discussions, but let's get back to Sanie Lund. Sanie Lund's letters are such a treasure trove of documents, and we are so lucky to have two wonderful historians help introduce us to them. The first editor is Jenny L. Lund, who is an independent historian and museum consultant. She is the former director of the Historic Sites Division of the Church History Department of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She is the 2024 winner of the Leroy S. Axland Best Utah History Article Award from the Utah History Society. The second editor is Elizabeth Oberdick Anderson, who is an independent historian and editor. She is the author of Cowboy Apostle, The Diaries of Anthony W. Ivins, which was a recipient of the Mormon History Association's Best Book Award and the Utah Division of State History Board's Best Documentary Book Award. And on a personal note, Jenny used to be my boss when I was a young and naive and earnest undergraduate student interning for the Church Historic Sites. I had the privilege of working with her and the others in that department to help restore what is now the Harmony Restoration Site in Pennsylvania. So you can give her credit for anything I do right, but I deserve the blame for anything I do wrong. But anyways, let's get to the interview with Jenny and Elizabeth. I'm now pleased to be joined by the two authors and editors of this volume to talk about such a fabulous and interesting person, as well as her revealing letters. So Jenny, why don't we start with you and tell us why you took on this project, why you determined that Sanie's letters were worth publishing?
Well, a few years ago, I was talking to some grad students, history grad students, and one of them at the end asked me if I had any advice for a budding historian, and I said yes. Marry into a family with a lot of good documents, which is what I did. And so that's how I came to find these letters. And it's been almost 40 years ago when a distant relative of my husband's let me see the letters and take them for a week to read them. And I was blown away. They're just fabulous. And so when those letters finally, at a little encouragement from me, made their way into the church history library many years later, I knew that those letters transcended family history. There's a lot of good family history out there, but it's not really helpful to most people. But these letters transcend that. She speaks with a very unique voice. She is engaging, she's witty, she's observant, she's perceptive. She can tell a good story. They reveal things about 19th century Utah, and particularly about the experiences of the wives of Latter-day Saint missionaries, that we just don't have this kind of a sustained, terrific record of. And so I thought, we have got to publish these letters.
All right, so let's get into her life then, Jenny, because her entire Mormon experience is framed around missionary work. Her father is away while she's born on a mission. Then, of course, she marries a man who's climbing the hierarchy, and he ends up serving a number of missions. So while so much of LDS history can focus on these people who are going out on missions, mostly men, but sometimes men and women, why is it so important to capture the other side of that experience of what was going on at home with the families that were left behind?
So historians of Mormonism have done a great job of documenting missionary efforts, and particularly this kind of triumphal narrative of establishing missions around the world and the growth of those missions. They've done a terrific job of that, but there are parts of that story which have been missed. And to get the full story of the missionization of Latter-day Saints, their missionary efforts, it's really essential to fill out that picture. And we've seen some really good work in recent years. Let's put them in context of the broader Christian missionary efforts. And the wives who were left at home to sustain this this missionization effort is a part of that story, which has very much been left out. When we started working on this book, there was one article that talked about it in terms of also military wives and wives left alone on the frontier and widows. That was it. There's been some work since then, some excellent work since then, but we think Sanie's voice really adds a unique perspective to that story.
Yeah, and it would just be one thing if it was capturing that experience, but it captures the experience in such a lively way. So, Beth, when reading Sanie's letters, her wit, her spunk, her attitude immediately come through. Now, these aren't typically attributes that we find associated with the homespun pioneer woman. So why do you think it's important to capture these full-fledged personalities that really come through in Sanie's letters?
I think so many of the biographies and things like that have been written are very one-dimensional. We're trying to idolize. We're trying to, put these people up as, on a pedestal. And Sanie is definitely not on a pedestal. She lets it all hang out. And that's what I personally absolutely love about her. As Pioneer Day is here, we hear stories all the time about how wonderful the pioneers were. And they went through horrific things and they did wonderful things. But we tend to judge ourselves, I think, sometimes by that standard and feel like we fall short. I'm a convert. I have no pioneer history. And so I am not really good enough because I haven't gone through that kind of stuff. When you read with Sanie, you realize, she didn't always do what was expected of her. She didn't always feel the way that was expected of her. And that makes me feel better. And I feel like she's a real person. She's definitely fleshed out. Once you've read Sanie's letters, you really know Sanie. You know how she feels about everything. And I love that. She has a quote in the book that says, missions make men more religious. I think her brother told her that. And she says, well, I don't know if that's true, but it doesn't have the same effect on women. It's worse if such a thing could be. So she's just very honest and it's just refreshing not to have someone that, yes, you still really respect and still really revere, but you see they're just like you and they feel the same way you do. So
yeah, as like most historians, I read lots and lots of primary sources. Very few batches of primary sources had me laughing as much as this collection of letters, which is just a wonderful reprieve. But it's not all fun and games, of course. Jenny, a lot of the letters have to do with the mundane tasks of money and management and having to withstand lacking the breadwinner in the home, especially for, these families on the frontier. One of the stories that really captured this dynamic for me in the letters was the story of the barn. Can you talk about that story and why it really touches on these crucial dynamics of these wives trying to keep the homes functioning while the husbands are away?
Sure. So Sanie is in a position where she's still fairly young. She's not very old. She's not. I don't even think she's 30 yet when Anton goes on his mission, a second mission, and she's left at home with these 5 little boys, and so she's got them to manage and the money and everything. She's never had to make household decisions on her own before. She's probably been consulted on household decisions, but she's never had to make them on her own. And after the first winter of trying to take care of the horses and the cows and the pigs in the winter, going out because they're just in sheds. That's all they have to protect them from the wind and snow and rain. She decides that she's going to build a barn. And you can see the development of that in the letters. She doesn't tell him for a while after she started this project. And then she finally does tell him what she's doing. She says, I hope you won't be too vexed with me. And I hope you won't say I could have used the money in a better way. And she just builds it. And so this goes on. These letters go on for 9 months, just dropping little hints and pieces of the story until And you can just watch Sanie grow. She talks about it with more confidence, the barn with more confidence. And when she finally gets to the terrible months of like February and March, when it's so cold and wet and snowy, and then she's just writing back and saying, this is the best thing we've ever done. Why didn't you think of this years ago? We would have saved a lot of money. And I think it really represents how somebody under that kind of pressure could really grow exponentially. She just gains incredible confidence through that process. And I think it also shows the significance of women's role in economic life. She's doing a lot to help this family sustain themselves. She's selling pigs, she's selling honey, she's selling all kinds of things to try and sustain this family. And the reason that Latter-day Saint missionary enterprise with husbands being sent off on missions was even possible was because women played significant economic roles in the time. I don't think most people who aren't trained in history or don't read a lot of history realize that women are doing a significant amount, bringing in a significant amount of a household's economic wealth.
Yeah, and I loved how, especially in your introductory material, you provide context for that and compare them to what's going on to women where their husbands are off on the wars, they're serving in the military, or these Protestant missions, or just women in general with their household economy. I'm sure many people are familiar with Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's wonderful book, Midwife's Tale, that like uncovers this overlooked and often consciously forgotten economic network that women actually built. And we see this in such stark terms here in the story. So we've covered the fun and games. We've covered the mundane. Now we're going to get to the dread, because if there's one thing that poor Sanie dreaded, it was polygamy. Her ever-present fear of her husband coming home from a mission and bringing home a plural wife. And of course, this is during the 1880s, when there's both an expectation from the church to take more wives, as well as prosecution coming from the government to imprison them. So there's both spiritual pressure and external opposition. So Beth, what does the perspective of someone like Sanie, who really does not fit into our common stereotype of the Mormons being staunch defenders of polygamy and embracing it as God's law, but as something that, you know, she had to wrestle with herself. How does that help flesh out the picture?
Well, I think I heard a quote once, and somebody said that with polygamy, plural marriage, that when it was lived well by all of the people, it was heaven on earth. But when it wasn't lived well, it was hell on earth. And I think most of the time it was probably more in the middle. And Sanie's experienced that. Her father had 3 wives. A lot of people around her had plural wives. But Anton has not experienced that. He did not grow up in a family with plural marriage. And I think it really speaks to Sanie that she doesn't like the concept of plural marriage, but she is actually reconciled to it. But she'd really rather her husband didn't take a second wife. But she does an awful lot of teasing. There's a lot of banter, a lot of teasing about him bringing home a second wife. And in fact, almost every one of the letters, but sometimes it really gets acerbic. She really gets a little bit irritated. And I think a lot of her problem was that she didn't feel confident enough that she would still be loved as well. She talks about him wanting a brand new lamb instead of, how does she put it? I think he was
dried up old mutton.
Dried old mutton. She doesn't want to be the dried up old mutton, and she's not that old, but she, like Jenny said. But so there's that kind of working. But she also finds out very unexpectedly from somebody else that Anton's been corresponding with a friend of theirs back in Ephraim about somebody he's thinking of taking as a plural wife. And she's pretty livid at that, especially because he didn't tell her. But there is another woman that we realized, we kind of connected the dots, that's in the co-op before he leaves, that would like, we think, to be his plural wife. And she doesn't get married until after Anton comes home and things settle down and stuff. So we think, Sanie's always talking about your second wife, Martha. And so there's a lot of banter, and sometimes it's very, sarcastic. But at the same time, deep down inside, I think she's resigned to it. And she says, mother says, we should have gone into it earlier, plural marriage, but I assume you'll still get your chance. But she does say, we don't have enough money for a second wife. And the federal marshal's around and stuff. So she is trying to keep him out of it. And he doesn't take a second wife. So she's all right on that count.
One of my favorite letters, and I quote a few of these in the video, but one of my favorite is like a 6th letter in a row where she teases him about this, and she says, but I don't care if you do or not. And then she must have realized that I've mentioned this 6 straight letters, I can't really say I don't care. And then she says, okay, maybe I do care a little.
Yes.
it was so human. It was so human.
It is so human.
And that's why she really strikes me as such a compelling narrator. All right, so I'm going to close, and I want to hear from both of you on this. A favorite anecdote or story or theme or quote, just something that stands out to you from this volume that brings the significance of Sanie's letters to readership.
Well, I'm going to start, and I think one of my favorite stories is when shortly after Anton has left her at home with these 5 boys, the youngest of whom, when he leaves, is 19 months old, so he's not very old. She takes Otha, is his name, Othniel, so they call him Otha. She takes him to go to state conference, and so she's sitting in Tabernacle in Ephraim, and she says Otha is singing so loud, and he's chattering, and everybody's paying attention to him, and then he says, and then this is her quote, and to finish off with, he called as loud as he could, Sanie, give me some titty now. Take it out, Sanie. And then the folks all around laughed. I felt rather cheap. So I love that story. It is so, it's humorous. It's funny. She's poking fun at herself, right? She can tell a good story. She lays out a narrative. But the thing I love about it is it's so relatable. I mean, There's no parent alive who has just not been embarrassed or even mortified by their children in public somewhere, right? And when you read that story, you say, oh, she was just like me. And maybe my experience wasn't nearly as bad as hers, right? So I love that story.
That's great. What about you, Beth?
One of the things that I really like is it's the one quote that you had talked about, where she said, you did say in one of your letters you weren't going to bring a wife home. Well, you may or you may not. And I don't know as I care. And then again, I do care. And I can kind of feel that. And she's very vulnerable. She also said in another one, I often wonder if you at all think it's a care for me to be left alone to manage the children, or if you're too busy. I often think you are needed just as bad at home as there, because she's had these boys that she's had to wrangle with. And then I love this part. Let the sinners take care of themselves. She wants Anton home. She says, I expect you will lecture me on this. All right, it will not change my opinion. I can so empathize with her. As Jenny said, you really empathize with what she's saying. She's not holding herself up as the perfect example of a good Mormon wife. And, she's definitely not Molly Mormon. And I just absolutely love her.
Well, if Laurel Thatcher Ulrich was correct that well-behaved women seldom make history, I'm really glad that Sanie was at least linguistically not well-behaved and that history is preserved. Such a phenomenal volume. Thank you again, Jenny and Beth, for answering my questions. And if this doesn't get people to go get a copy, I don't know what would. Thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks again to Jenny and Beth for taking some time out of their day to answer my questions. I hope you found it as useful as I did. A few key lessons I want to take of why I find this volume so important. First is it captures the domestic realities that are behind the scenes of foreign missions. That just focusing on what goes on in the mission field is only half the story in the 19th century, because we have to understand what's going on at home that made those missionaries possible. Second, we get the experiences and ideas of Mormon women, those perspectives that often get overlooked. And Sanie, even no matter how representative she was, she is an incisive thinker and narrates her experiences in ways that really flesh out our stories. And third, something that I assume will be of interest to many of you, is she captures the deep anxiety that many Latter-day Saints had about polygamy, even at the same time that the church was defending its right to practice it due to the onslaught of the federal government. It's during the 1880s that the government is imprisoning polygamists. And in response, church leaders are doubling down, saying you need to practice it. And outwardly, many Latter-day Saints were willing to do that. But inwardly, at least some, and Sanie is representative of them, push back. So here, for instance, is an account from a letter she gave from one of these church meetings where church leaders were insisting that polygamy is the law of God. Quote, "Last Sunday, they just gave the men fits for not going into polygamy. I better not tell you all they said, or you will be bringing half dozen or so home with you. And we haven't got room for that many." And put that in the context of all her other letters, you can see this deep discomfort. And it's just a reminder that one of the reasons polygamy collapsed was a forfeiture from the members themselves, from the ground up, pushing back against church leaders to the point where the church leaders realized they couldn't go forward because they didn't have the support. Anyways, I love this volume. I strongly recommend it. I think it's worth a read. Again, it's titled We All Must Be Crazy. I'll link to it in the video description. Go get it from an independent bookstore, especially if you're in Utah, from Benchmark Books. History has never been more relevant than it is today because it allows us to capture these three-dimensional figures like Sanie Lund, who give us more perspective on the culture that produced the world that Mormonism is today and really collapses the distance between our eras.